at Convey.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone. As Lauren said, we have a bit of information to cover today, so I'm going to try to be quick in covering the information, but also be thorough for you. And one other piece of information just to be aware of, because I know this will be a question that everybody will ask if I don't cover it, is will the slides be made available? Unfortunate? No, I'm just kidding. Yes, the slides will be available following the presentation. We are recording this presentation, and we'll make both the recorded version of the presentation as well as the slides for this presentation available to you probably by the end of the week. So, our agenda for today. First, we're going to go over a B-Notice process overview, cover the what is it, why does it happen. Then we're going to talk about, the P-Notice, overview that process, some of the things that were new in 2011, eliminating notices, what you can do proactively, things like solicitation packets for when you have notices, B and P notice best practices. We're going to talk about the abatement practice. So if you do have them and you've got the P notice, how do you abate such penalties? And then some additional resources that are available to you to be able to manage this process more efficiently. As you see throughout the presentation, we'll have clever and funny cartoons. So really what we're talking about is proactive versus reactive process. For many of you, hopefully not all of you, but generally a lot of people are more on the reactive side. 1099 compliance, third-party information reporting is oftentimes not the main focus of an organization. They're focused on other parts that more or less add value to their bottom line of their business. And, some of these compliance and regulatory things sometimes fall to the wayside. And then it's the dog of noncompliance that bites you, and then you find yourself in the reactive state of gathering responses, validating information, dealing with, B notice and abatement. And a lot of what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how do you handle that, but then also how do you make it a more proactive process. So if we think about this 1099 reporting, third-party information reporting process, most people follow a general timeline. In January, you print and mail your 1099s, hopefully by the 31st. In April, you transmit the records to the IRS. In October, if unfortunately you have payees that don't have accurate TIN information, you'll receive a CP 2100 notice. You then send out solicitations on those individuals, and in the November timeframe, while collecting those responses, updating records, you then make the decision to start or stop backup withholding, and then in August you receive the 972CG, the penalty notice. So the CP 2100 is the B notice, the 972CG is the P notice. We'll use those intermixingly. I'll try to remain consistent throughout the presentation. Then once again, you're looking at sending solicitations and responding to the penalty notice. This is generally abatement. Most organizations will abate their penalties in a large part because you can be pretty successful with it if you can show that you're doing the appropriate steps to collect that information. Most people generally don't just hand over the check to the IRS and say, here's some more money. So it can be expensive. So what is a B notice? Really, a B notice is a backup withholding notice. So if somebody doesn't have an accurate name or TIN, the IRS is going to say, well, you need to withhold on payments made to those individuals. Not all form types are included in it. There is one form type that is missing here, which is the 1099-K. However, these are the form types that are included in the B notice where you would have to do backup withholding. So generally it's the CP 2100, CP 2100A, and most of the time it's going to be based on the prior year transmittals. So what you did for this last year, it's going to be the year previous that you'll get the B notices oftentimes for this summer set of B notices. So it's the previous year's filing. And you have to keep in mind that the IRS has gotten pretty stringent around a lot of this, in part because when you think about it, when you're doing this third-party information reporting, if you don't have an accurate name TIN, the information you just sent to the IRS is completely useless, and that's why there are real penalties. There is things like withholding, and the IRS does expect you to follow a set of guidelines and practices. So let's say you get a B notice. What do you need to do? What are the next steps? Aside from probably, crying at your desk and wishing that you didn't receive it, there are a few things that you should do from a best practice standpoint. First, search for any accounts that have the same name PIN. So you may have an individual with the name PIN combination where maybe you transpose something, you identify other accounts. What you really want to try to do is be sure that you identify all the different areas where you might have that individual tied to. So when you fix the problem in one place, you're also fixing it in the other areas. Or you may have more accurate, more updated information in another location in your system. So when you find matches, what you'll need to do is you have 15 business days to send your B notice solicitation. So this is really a B notice W-9 solicitation letter. And then, there's 15 days to respond. If you fail to gather the correct information, you must begin backup withholding. You should withhold immediately for missing TINs. For non-matches, no solicitation is required. So if you don't find any individuals that have the matching name TIN in your records from what you received the B notice for, you do not need to do a solicitation on those accounts as well. First or second B notice. This is an important thing to keep in mind. In a large part, you need to really be sure that you keep track of this because the IRS doesn't. And there are different solicitation rules for, whether it's a first B notice or second B notice, and, it follows the 2- and 3-year rule. So if you receive 2 B notices for an individual in a 5-year period of time, you treat it as a first B notice. If you receive 2 B notices within a 3-year period of time, you would treat it as a second B notice. So if it's a first B notice, the account is identified in 1 B notice or identified 2 B notices outside the 3 calendar years. And once again, is a second B notice if it's identified by 2 within that 3 calendar year period of time. Why does this matter? Because you're not sending the same thing. If it is a first B notice letter, you're sending a cover letter, a W-9 or substitute, an optional reply envelope. I always recommend sending a reply envelope, and you do not need to file a corrected return. If it is a second B notice, it's the same thing, except you have to do one thing differently, an SSA printout. So you need to collect that instead of your W-9. So that's why you need to keep track of whether or not it is a first or second B notice. So remember that 2 and 3 rule. And a Form W-9 does not satisfy a second B notice. That is why there is the rule. So now what? Well, if it's a first B notice, you have to ask yourself, did you get that W-9 within 30 days? If yes, update the records with the certified name TIN. If no, you need to begin backup withholding within 30 business days.
Sorry to interrupt, Ray. Can you just clarify what an SSA printout is?
SSA printout, we'll try to go back to that. It's another form that the IRS has available. It's very similar. It's just a Social Security Administration form for a business or individual to identify the same information on a W-9.
Thanks.
Second B notice. Did you receive the SSN printout or 147C? It's the business equivalent of that within the 30-day period of time. If yes, update records with a certified name TIN. If no, begin backup withholding within 30 business days. So what are some of the things that are new to people that maybe haven't paid attention to this for a little while? Like I said earlier, the 1099-K is a new form that you can receive B notices for, Form 3922, 3921, and Form 1042S. 1042S is kind of a slightly strange one to have here, but if you don't have an accurate account ID, then you can receive penalties. Penalties are increasing. They are getting rid of the Form SSA 7028 and just using the SSA to resolve the second B notice. What is penalized? So, there's the B notice There's also the P notice, and there are things that you can get penalized for that aren't just missing name TINs. You can also be penalized for late return or submitting things in a bad format. So if you send the IRS a file and that file has incorrect information or the formatting is wrong, they can send you a penalty notice for that. Or let's say if you send your 1099's paper over the 250 form limit that is allowed for the paper filing, for each additional form you can be assessed a penalty for that as well. One important note is if you decide to ignore a given rule, whether it be taking the appropriate steps around a B notice process, gathering your W-9s appropriately, filing appropriately, and you actively make the decision that you're just going to eat the penalty, technically, if you're doing something that you know to be wrong, that is called intentional disregard. I bring it up because that means there is no limitation on the penalty. So, in fact, even being educated in this webinar, the IRS could possibly consider that intentional disregard. So, be sure that when you're looking at these things that you're doing the best effort and you're doing the things that you can, that you're allowed and capable to do as it relates to this process. So, how do you handle these P notices, the Form 972CG? Well, you have to answer the notice within 45 days. You can request an extension to the 45-day window, which, in general best practice, requesting an extension, never a bad idea. And you can abate the penalty, which means, provide them reasonable cause as to why it happened for a variety of reasons. And here's, 3 of the reasons right here. So you perform the required actions on the B notices. Maybe you perform annual solicitations for missing TINs. So if you're sending out on an annual basis W-9s for anybody that you don't have that information for, you're doing a best practice, you're doing your best effort to gather that information. It's not your fault in a lot of cases that the payee is not responding to you with the correct information. So paying a penalty doesn't really make sense in that situation. Also, if you perform solicitations for incorrect name TINs. The other thing to note here is if you're really good at this process and you do a good job, you actually don't get penalties imposed if your P notice or penalty notice is 0.5% of your total return. So if you just have a handful of issues with penalties, it's not something that the IRS is going to put you through a bunch of work for if overall you're doing a good job. So if you get a penalty notice, you're also going to be doing solicitations there as well. So it's very similar to the B notice process. You do not need to actually send if a B notice was sent for the same year. So if you get a penalty notice for an individual and you already sent a B notice solicitation for that individual, you do not need to do a P notice or 972CG solicitation as well, because you've already satisfied that with your B notice solicitation. For the 1099-R form, there are a couple outside aspects. You have 30 days to send solicitation, 45 days to respond, and you can include a W-4P. So that covers the what do you do to once you have a notice and what does that process look like. Now what we're going to do is we're going to roll back into the how do I stop these notices from coming in. So once again, just as it's nice to always recap, most of us follow the basic process of I file my 1099s, I receive my B notices, I send out my W-9s, I receive my penalties, I write an abatement. And for far too many, this cycle goes around and around and around and around like a clock. However, like we talked about, the majority of that process is an incredibly reactive one. All the little balls here are red for a reason, because that is bad. And this is bad because it can cost you a lot of money. And we're not just talking about money from a standpoint of penalties. Let's say you're a financial institution. If you're a financial institution and you are having a lot of B notices and you're having to do things like backup withholding, that's not really a good way to bridge the business customer relationship. Doing backup withholding on payments on your customers or even your vendors for that matter doesn't really make anybody happy. You're not happy you have to do it. They're sure not happy that you're doing it. And it can create a difficult situation for everybody. That's aside from the standpoint that when you start entering into processes like B notice processing, that's taking you away from activities that you would probably rather be spending your time doing and probably better served spending your time doing than dealing with this compliance piece of your business. Not to mention the penalties. So, if we're looking at how we're going to stop this, we're going to start discussing identity management. It's knowing who you're working with and how you're working with them. So this becomes difficult. Understanding your clients, understanding your vendors, understanding who you're working with can be difficult because we all work with different people. Some of us work with customers, banks, investment firms. Some people work with providers, if you're a health insurance or a merchant, or maybe you're working with vendors if you work in an AP department. And gathering that information is not easy, depending on the relationship you have, the frequency of touch. So you're probably saying, well, understanding all this information for people sounds kind of difficult. Maybe I can just skip it. That is a bad idea. So we've talked about the money aspect. So there's the penalties, there's the fines. There's also willful neglect, which means those penalties and fines see no end, plus you have the option for up to 1 year in jail. And there's mandatory backup withholding. No faster way to lose a customer or destroy a vendor relationship than starting to hold 30% of their payments. So let's talk about old versus new. So today, manual process, paper W-9s, very reactive, and we're going to look at an automated process that's real-time and much more proactive. So we're going to start by collectively digging our heads out of the sand, and we're going to break this down into really 4 steps to collecting and managing your data. And the first step is going to be identifying the information that's bad, soliciting for corrections, collecting responses, and updating your source systems. So the first step is really knowing what you don't know. So there's a few ways that you can do this. You can wait for a B notice. That's not a good way. You can do things like use TIN matching services, either in real time or bulk. And we'll talk about those services a little bit more because, if you're not utilizing the IRS's e-services for real-time TIN matching or the IRS bulk TIN matching, you really need to start. This is the best way for you to identify whether or not the IRS is going to send you a B notice for payee that you're filing. Regularly checking these systems and having a process in place to do so will reduce and or eliminate your penalties. So what's the difference? Well, real-time TIN verification is a service where you're able to check in real time an individual's tax identification number and in the individual's name and be sure that they are indeed correct. This is great if you're looking at making one-time payments or if the payment is immediate or if it's very difficult to collect this information after the fact. What happened in Vegas stayed in Vegas, for example. The other thing that's great, whether it's real-time or the bulk TIN matching service where you can submit a file of up to 100,000 records at a time and then a response from the IRS comes back within 48 hours, is great because it helps you with a lot of things that are sometimes inadvertent. For instance, if I were to ask everybody on this webinar, what is the name of Amtrak to the IRS? They would probably respond with Amtrak. Well, actually, it's the National Railroad Passenger Corporation. It's a common mistake that people would make. Or there's the misspellings. That is not Jane Bonds, it is James Bonds. Simple transpositions in names and things like that can end up causing things like B notices. So using these tools can help alleviate that. So you're saying, okay, well, this TIN matching thing sounds great. How do I get it? Well, it's a free service from the IRS. The interactive TIN matching, bulk TIN matching. Publication 2108A, review it. It's not a very long publication actually, and it tells you how to sign up for the IRS services. A couple points of note. Signing up does take time. It requires Social Security number, just gross income of an officer of the company. This is why a lot of people, sometimes their organizations don't use it. Is this a service that is offered by lovely companies like Convey? Absolutely. So if your officer of the company does not want to sign up for this service, but you still want to use it, definitely this is something that we can help with. We help with frequently. It's also good to think about it from an account initiation perspective. What if the initial information W-9 is wrong? That's going to lead to a B notice the next year. So there's really a better way. The IRS interactive TIN matching is going to help you guarantee that the information is correct, and there are ways to even integrate that with your source system. So we talked about account initiation or account setup. There are ways that we can help you or that you can help yourself through either business processes or technology to integrate that within your current workflow. So, step 2, you now know what you know. Now it's time to reach out and touch someone. So you can do that by phone, by mail, email, in person. This, once again, really goes back to the type of relationships that you have with your users. You can do solicitation packets. You can actually do a combination of many of the things. You can have an email that directs them to a portal on a website, or that also provides a telephone customer service line. You can do a letter or self-mailer. You can mail out W-9s. The thing that I want to make clear here is because you haven't received a B notice, all of these options are available to you. The day you receive that B notice, all of these options go away. Once you get the B notice, you have to follow that B notice process we discussed earlier. B notice process sucks. It costs more money. It takes more time. So you really want to try to be sure that you're not spending time on the back end when you can spend the time on the front end. Step 3, getting your answers. So this is really about, collecting the responses, and that's in a large part obviously going to depend on the way that you're soliciting for that information. So did you do it on a website? Did you do it in person? Did you do it by phone, by mail, by fax? You want to provide a multitude of ways for them to reach back out to you to get that response, because some people are going to be fine just filling out a form, putting it in the mailbox. Other people just want a quick pick up with the phone, a link in an email to go to a portal to update that information. The more ways you provide for somebody to give you this data, the better success rate you're going to have. And we're going to talk about the kind of time that can sometimes take people. An important note, not a one-and-done process. Sometimes people really don't care because they already have their money. They're not expecting to do business with you again. So, hey, it doesn't bother me that you got this letter. So a lot of times you have to reach out multiple times. So if we look at it, let's say you have 13,000 TINs to fix. Based on a 40% response rate, you're looking at about 18 months to get through all of it. Now, granted, this is a lot of TINs for most organizations, so it's a bit of an extreme example to have bad or missing TINs. However, the important point to illustrate is this is not something that you can have as a 30-day project. The other thing I also want to make clear is, this is one of those things that you can get really good, and then you start falling back into old habits, and then once again, you find yourself in the same situation. So you really want to be sure that you make if B notices is something that your organization deals with frequently, really look at those proactive steps that you can do to better mitigate that process on the front end. So, fourth and final step. So, we've identified the information either by waiting, we've done real-time TIN matching, whatever. We've solicited for corrections, we've collected our responses. Now it's time to update our source systems. So this is getting the information back into your system. When you think about this, this is going to really be dependent on the type of business that you're operating. For some people, manually keying is going to be perfectly fine. For other people, you're looking at maybe spreadsheet management, maybe automated imports, and because if you have, let's say, 15,000 records to update, manually keying 15,000 records is not necessarily going to be the best way to do it. But the thing you really want to be sure is, especially if you're dealing with if you have a 1099 system that you use for your reporting and you have your back office system that you use for all your other business operations like invoicing, payments, and stuff like that, you want to be sure that you can reconcile the two. And hopefully you have a 1099 solution that allows you to export reports, be able to import that into the system if you have a highly complex environment. So what you're really looking for is something that's really a comprehensive approach, because if you just solve one of these, you're not really going to solve the whole problem. However, to be fair, if you look at them as 4 pieces of identity management, you can really take a few pieces of that, like maybe you really are focused on the real-time TIN with OFAC and DMF and the response handling, and that solves 80% of the problems your organization is dealing with today. You have to really view this pragmatically through the lens of your organization and what they're able to do right now. At the very least, if you're not using e-services to verify the information as the IRS expects to see it from you, or the name TIN for the B-notice process, you should be doing that. Aside from also being sure that you're following good abatement practices and B-notice solicitation practices, so you're doing that compliantly.
Ray, I'm just going to jump in real quick. Just want to let everyone know we have about 2 minutes left in the webinar, but we have about 10 more slides we'd like to cover. So I invite you to stay on the line with us and listen in. And if you need to drop off, that's just fine. We will be recording this and sending out the slides and the recording sometime in the week. And that's all.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I have a tendency to talk too long, so I'm trying to go quickly. So if we look at this process, it's really an evolution of identity management. Because the other way you're managing IDs too, you're getting your B notices and then you're reaching out to people and you're saying, all right, great. But what we're really saying is get to know them before you get the penalty. The better you know your vendors, your clients, your customers, whoever the relationship is that you're doing this reporting on behalf of, the better situation you're going to find yourself in. So with this information and thinking about it in that way, you have to really kind of take a step back and look, are you receiving, 10% of your reporting you're getting B notices back on? Or, you kind of fear the August time frame for the stuff to start showing up on your desk in the mail. If that's the, there's a lot better things to do in that time of year than do B notice handling and response gathering and things like that. So if that's the situation you find yourself in, really take some of these steps, and if you want help with some of that, that's definitely something we can help you with. So really what we're talking about again is a proactive process. So it's to identify that incorrect information. A big piece of this is when you're doing this proactively, you don't have rules on how you're soliciting or collecting that data. You don't have to go through the B notice process or anything like that. It really allows you to take a much more pragmatic approach to the problem in getting that information. If you are, however, waiting upon receiving that B notice and then you're going through that process, you have to go through that process. There are no other options available to you. Other options may make more sense, but unfortunately you don't get to make that decision. So what if you still have errors? Well, yeah, so if you look for mistakes, you'll find some, right? Well, there's a right way and a wrong way to handle everything. So let's talk about the right way. So first, B notice and P notice best practices. So one, you need to load and input the notices as soon as possible. So if you receive, I think over 200 or over 100, they actually send you a CD. You immediately need to match that against your current data, and the timer starts at the notice date or the date you receive from the IRS. Matching data against prior year data will lead to more notices. Remember to apply the 2- and 3-year rule. 1 mailing per year is all that's required, and then remember the B notice mailing does satisfy the penalty notice. Your cover letter should be clear and easy to understand. Brevity is the soul of wit. Be sure that it it makes it abundantly clear why you're sending it and what needs to be on there. You also need to include a phone number, website, FAQ, information for questions is a great idea. Generally don't file corrections based on W-9s. You will want to update your source systems and automate this process if possible. Now, if you're obviously dealing with the B notices, you'll probably end up dealing with the P notices, so abatement best practices. Documentation is key. Do what you say, prove what you do. So processes and procedures, year-over-year progress, metrics, this is what we mailed, these are the responses, these are the no responses. Here's the W-9s they received or any other documentation based off of other emails, mailings, things like that. Having this information available is critical, especially if you get into an audit situation. The IRS loves to poke around at an organization's 1099 practices is a good way to determine whether or not they're going to do a larger audit. So being sure that you have these practices shored up is always a good idea. Now, if you're looking for an abatement letter, we have a sample abatement letter, I believe, on our website. So you can abate for history of filing with correct name and information. So it's, hey, we're always really pretty good about this. We do a good job. We haven't received these before. Or it could be, this payee gave us the wrong information. How am I supposed to know their Social Security number? Right? You didn't fill it out for them. Or maybe they didn't respond. But you still need to respond within 45 days. So, or you can file the extension like we talked about earlier. But the big point here is you need to respond. So always try to abate. Worst case scenario, they say no and you pay the penalty anyways. But always, 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 always abate. So key takeaways. The best way to deal with P notices is to not get them. Not necessarily groundbreaking piece of information there, but there are ways to do it, like taking advantage of the IRS enmeshing program. You need to document everything. And also, utilize tools to automate and minimize the manual work. If you can minimize the manual work that you're doing, it makes the process a lot easier, and ultimately it makes it a repeatable process, which means you get better at it, which means you eliminate notices. So with that, we're 4 minutes over. As Lauren stated, submit your questions to the Q&A and/or chat, and we will follow up with you on those questions. And we invite you to stay up to date with us on either our blog, Twitter, or LinkedIn.
That concludes today's webinar. Thanks for hanging out a few extra minutes with us. Again, if you guys ever have any questions about how Convey can help or any of Convey's solutions, feel free to visit our website at convey.com or send in an email to info@convey.com. Thanks and have a great afternoon.